So, Rachel, what's our next question and who's it from?
It's from John, and John asks, lots of rural, poorer constituencies, he's thinking West Country and East Anglia, used to be Tory Liberal battles, but now models suggest Labour could come second, or in some cases is even winning. On the one hand, the Tiverton and Honiton by-election suggests Lib Dems are the real challengers, even when polling third. On the other hand, these areas are full of people who could easily be Labour voters in another region. What is your best guess? A Liberal resurgence, Labour switch, or the anti-Tory vote divided and Conservatives keeping these seats?
It's an interesting question because it's something that I've often thought about with some of the by-elections we've had lately. He mentioned Tiverton and Honiton. Labour was second place there. And actually the Lib Dems leapfrogged them to win that by-election off the Conservatives. Same in North Shropshire. And also the Lib Dems, I think, are the favourites to win Mid Bedfordshire if we see a by-election there, if Nadine Dorries vacates her seat. Labour's second place there as well. So what, is this an example of that tactical voting, Ben, that you're talking about? And why is it tactical to vote Lib Dem when Labour's second place? Surely the Lib Dem voters should fall in behind Labour in that case.
I get a lot of Labour friends and activists ask me this. Why on earth are you saying Lib Dem should win Mid Bedfordshire? Why on earth? Because Labour came second in Mid Bedfordshire at the last election, but it was a very distant second. So we've talked about Tiverton, North Shropshire. Both of them had Labour second. Anywhere else? There's been a litany of countryside constituencies where the Labour Party have come second in a general election. In a campaign they didn't do anything in, by the way, because Labour campaigns in rural seats aren't as active as perhaps some may imply on social media, and you happen to come second with the Lib Dems narrowly behind. That doesn't make you the primary challenger to win the seat. That just makes you, by chance, by default, having more votes without a single campaign. This is the thing with countryside seats and voters generally. But your position, who you are, first, second, third, isn't really important when you need to consider what's your potential. So here's an example. You have a rural seat. Labour got 20%. Lib Dems got 15%. But who has more potential? Who has greater favourability amongst potential voters to your cause? Now, Labour, generally speaking, like the Conservatives, they're the established parties. They're the two parties of potential government. When you're looking for protest voters, you're not going to get as many of them to those parties as you would for the Lib Dems. And there's a lot of voters from the Labour and Tories who are willing to go for protest parties, but those protest parties aren't each other. Right. So the Tories are losing, 1 in 10 of their vote to Labour right now. But they aren't protest voters. They're actually pretty solid voters who will stay with Labour until after the next election, most likely. But the Tories are also losing a different kind of voter who are, a bit more rural, normally like the Tories, would never go near Labour, but absolutely are apathetic at this moment in time. And the ceiling, what that means is the ceiling in seats like Mid Bedfordshire is a lot higher for the Lib Dems than it is for Labour. The potential number of supporters you could win over is higher for the Lib Dems in countryside constituencies, in seats where there are voters looking to protest rather than look for an alternative, a party styling itself as government. Look, when you see a Lib Dem campaign, you're not seeing a campaign for government. You're seeing a campaign, to campaign against house building that they've just suddenly discovered is being built in Mid Bedfordshire. When you're looking at Labour, you're looking at a party that's more like, we're also the establishment that you want to rally against, but we're a different kind of establishment. The Lib Dems have a lot more potential with switchers than Labour do. And like I say, the ceiling is higher for them, and that's why they win it. That's why they do well. Favourability towards the Lib Dem brand in these types of seats, among these type of people, isn't terrible, but it's okay. It's fine. Favourability to the Labour brand, non-existent. It doesn't exist. There's a lot of potential for Labour in certain rural constituencies, particularly some very deprived ones. They're seeing a slight recovery in Cornwall, for example, which is not what we saw. The last time we saw that was 1997. Scarborough and Whitby, pretty rural. I mean, you've got really built up Scarborough, but you've got that as well. Beverley and Holderness in East Yorkshire, there's a potential for Labour there, although it's a bit of a reach. But there is potential for Labour, but it's a certain kind of countryside seat. It's a certain kind where you've got to go out and campaign. You can't expect it to come to you.
Yeah, and I think you have to remember, actually, and I think we often forget this when we think about rural England. We associate it with sort of Tory affluence, but also sort of agricultural industry, but actually a lot of these places are ex-industrial. That, you know, some of the places that I was going around in northeast Somerset are ex-mining towns, and there's a real Labour heritage there.
Yeah, I was also going to say that there are also like groups of rural voters that are just always going to have a dislike for class politics,
right?
And who would probably be more comfortable voting Lib Dem. I think what Ben was saying earlier in the episode about Lib Dems just having a very good ground campaign in certain areas because they've always been the opposition to the Conservatives, so it's easier for them to, capitalise on that, on the infrastructure they've already got there. But I also wonder if there's an element of the Lib Dems benefiting longer term in some rural seats from having a very strong Remain position in the past, because a lot of the trade deals that have been kind of passed in recent years are actually really hitting them hard, and there's quite strong opposition to them in some rural areas. And I think they probably feel a bit more comfortable going to the Lib Dems for that reason, maybe.
That's interesting, because there is a growing narrative of betrayal among both farmers and fishing communities as well, which may, explain some of the shifting politics in the places in Cornwall that you've been looking at, Ben.
When you think of Lib Dem strength, you think, most of us do, we think back to 1997 and you look at that map of the UK and you see a lot of yellow. Or is it orange? Or is it gold? I don't know.
We once actually did do an article about what colour Lib Dems actually are. This was a long time ago when there was far less editorial control of the New Statesman.
You think back to 1997, you remember seeing where the Lib Dem strength was. It was Cornwall, it was Devon, it was Somerset, it was a bit of Dorset, bit of Wiltshire. I'm looking at the map now. And there was where they won well. However, to be honest with you, you say about fishing communities and such like turning against Brexit. I don't think there's enough of them in these types of seats to win it to the Lib Dems. So one example is this. Cornwall local elections, I keep referring back to local elections, it's a pet passion of mine. The Cornish local elections of a few years ago, 2021, when the Lib Dems were recovering, they were showing Remainer strength, if you want to call it that, because they won the Cheshire and Amersham by-election only a few months later. In Cornwall, they didn't do particularly well. They didn't recover at all. And the reason being is that they feel Brexit actually caused them to lose votes. And they did. They used to have a lot of very, I don't want to say populist, but very anti-establishment strength in places like Cornwall and Devon that they have been limited by years ago. UKIP, there were a lot of people in Cornwall and Devon who went Lib Dem local UKIP in European elections. It was very kind of weird. And I always remember some people getting shocked at this. How? We're the Lib Dems, we're progressive, we're liberal. How can we voters? They're all very shocked at that, aren't they, when they get told who their voters are? But that was how it was. And I think actually in Devon and Cornwall, Brexit has stymied the Lib Dem recovery, but it hasn't stymied them where there are more Remainers, in Surrey, in Berkshire, in Hertfordshire, where they are definitely seeing a lot of potential. So when we look at the future map of Lib Dem seats, it's not going to be like 1997. It's not going to be the Southwest. It's actually going to be the Southeast and a bit of the East. So you're going to see them picking up around the surrounds of Cambridge. This is places where, you go to Cambridge, you study in Cambridge, you make a life in Cambridge, you get a job there, but you can't afford there. So you live on the outskirts of Cambridge in what is South Cambridgeshire or South East Cambridgeshire. Pretty affluent, pretty commuter heavy. They're not for keen on the Conservatives. Heidi Allen noticed it in her own seat when she was the MP there and tried to capitalise on that and then stood down. This is the type of seat that would be going more Lib Dem than, say, Fishing Village, England. We are talking commuterville, middle-class voters who have the time to think about Brexit, who have the time to rally against it, who are doing that. It's farmers, though, are a bit more. They feel more apathetic with voting than swinging against the Conservatives. You are seeing amongst the farming community, every poll you see, not all of them are great, surveys, but they're fine. You do see the Tory vote falling, collapsing by a sizable amount, but it's not really going to the other parties. It's more like going to apathy.
When I was in Mid-Suffolk, the leader of Mid-Suffolk Council was a farmer, and he, he's a Green. The Greens have just won that council, their first majority. And so perhaps it's less about Brexit, Lib Dems being the Remain party, less about switching from Tory to Labour, but more about just finding another protest vote
Another
in
outlet.
Greens. Yeah. Also, of course, the idea that the Green brand is associated with conserving one's environment. Well, I think that was really interesting. Thanks, Ben. And thank you so much for your map of the new constituencies, which everyone can go and see on State of the Nation if you haven't gone to look at it already.
Ben's smiling at that second plug.
Thanks to everyone who's submitted questions as well. We do read them all, so please keep them coming in. If you'd like to send us a question, you can go to newstatesman.com/youaskus. Or if you're watching on YouTube, you can just leave a comment under the video.